The wheels of the stagecoach groaned to a halt, sinking into the deep, fine dust that was the main street of Red Rock Crossing. The sun was a heavy, hot hand on the world, pressing down in the late afternoon. Lila Monroe gathered her skirts, stiff with alkali and grit, and stepped down onto the loose planks of the boardwalk. Her body ached from days of rocking and jolting. She held tight to the handle of her old valise, a heavy thing packed with school primers, her father's Bible, and, folded at the very bottom, the simple muslin wedding dress her mother had sewn with such hopeful, trembling hands. She looked up, past the raw lumber of the false front buildings, and saw them. The great red rock ridges stood against the pale, bleached sky, looking less like mountains and more like the bones of the earth itself. The air was thin and carried voices easily. Men by the saloon trough talked loud. She heard the words, "Indian trouble." It was a constant refrain. They spoke of the Navajo, of how they were harassing the survey crews for the railroad that was meant to cut straight through a place they called Red Sky Canyon. The fear in their voices was sharp, but beneath it, she heard something else, something hard and greedy. He was waiting for her inside the boarding house, standing by a dusty potted fern. Edward Kane. Her intended, he was a clerk for the railroad, a man of neat figures and precise habits. He smiled when he saw her, a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. He took her valise. He was polite. He was proper. He spoke of the small house they would have near the new depot. It would be a safe arrangement. Lila felt the words settle around her like a shroud. This was not love. She knew that as clearly as she knew her own name. It was a transaction, a safe harbor for a pastor's daughter from Ohio with no dowry and few prospects. She nodded, smoothing her dress, telling herself that safety was enough. It had to be. Later, while Edward was settling accounts with the stage line, Lila stepped out for a breath of air. The smell of dust, horse manure, and curing hides was thick. She walked toward the livery, drawn by the sound of the horses, and then she saw him. He was standing by a water trough, hands bound in front of him with military chain. 2 cavalrymen stood nearby, smoking, their rifles held loose. He was Navajo. He was tall, built lean and hard like the land itself. He stood perfectly still, his black hair unbound, his face like a mask carved from the red stone of the canyon. A gust of wind, hot and sudden, swept down the street, and his head lifted. He did not look at the town. He looked past it, toward the mountains, his dark eyes fixed on something only he could see, as if he were listening to a voice in the wind. One of the soldiers, noting her gaze, sauntered over. He tipped his cap, but his eyes were bold. "That there is Kelayazi, ma'am," the soldier said, spitting a brown stream of tobacco juice near her feet. "Head of a whole pack of 'em, thieves and murderers, the lot, causing no end of trouble for the railroad." Lila looked back at the prisoner. His face was bruised along the cheekbone. He did not look like a murderer. He did not look fierce. He looked like a man who had seen the end of something. The sadness in his eyes was so deep it felt older than the town itself. It was a sorrow, not a savagery. She met Pastor Miller at the building they called a church. It was little more than a large shed, smelling of new pine and sweat. He was a kind man, his face weathered like old leather, and he welcomed her in her father's name. He held her hands in his. "This is not Ohio, Miss Monroe," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Out here, the law is a thin coat, and it wears through quickly. Men put more faith in what they can hold in their hand." He nodded toward a man passing on the boardwalk, a heavy revolver tied low on his hip. "The Bible is good for Sunday, but a Colt talks all week long." That night, Lila could not sleep. The boarding house mattress was thin, the air close. She stood at her window, looking out over the dark shape of the town. The desert was vast, stretching out into an emptiness she had never imagined. A full moon, pale as a skull, climbed the sky, throwing the red cliffs into sharp relief. They looked like sleeping giants. The wind had risen, and it sang a high, lonesome song through the gaps in the buildings, carrying sand that hissed against the glass. It sounded like a mournful howl. She felt a shiver run through her. She was terrified of this place, and yet some small, quiet part of her was utterly captivated by its wild, raw beauty. In the dusty Star Saloon, the only two-story building in town, the whiskey was flowing. Baron Sam Holloway, the man they called the Railroad King, raised his glass. His suit was fine wool, untouched by the dust. Across from him sat Captain Caleb Briggs, his blue cavalry uniform pressed sharp. A map was unrolled between them on the heavy oak table. A thick black line was drawn straight through the heart of the terrain, marked in delicate script, Red Sky Canyon. "It is a simple matter of progress, Captain," Holloway said, his voice smooth as oiled steel. "We clear them out. A few skirmishes, a show of force. The land will be pacified." Briggs nodded, his face grim. "We will clean them out," he corrected. "My orders are to remove all hostiles." Holloway smiled. A brief, cold flash of teeth. "Hostiles. Then, the land has no legal owner. Captain, it only has a stronger one. And we are stronger." Hours later, long after the moon had begun its descent, Kelly Yazzie was being marched from the town lockup toward the small military outpost on the ridge. The chains on his wrists and ankles clinked with every step. He had not eaten. He had not been given water. He kept his head high. Below him, the town was a scattering of dark shapes. Only one window held a light. On the second-floor balcony of the boarding house, a figure stood, a woman. He saw the pale color of her hair in the moonlight. Lila, unable to breathe in her stuffy room, had stepped out onto the porch. She was looking at the mountains, the same ones he had watched all afternoon. As the soldiers prodded him forward, Kelly turned his head. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, found hers. It was just a glance, a flicker across the darkness, lasting no more than a second, but it struck them both. Lila felt a sudden, cold jolt, as if she had touched metal in a lightning storm. Kelly's step faltered for a fraction of a second. It was nothing. It was just a woman, a white woman. But the brief, impossible connection left a strange, unsettled feeling in both of them, like the first tremor of an earthquake far, far away. The next morning, the sun rose with the same relentless heat. Edward, freshly shaved and smelling of bay rum, met Lila in the boarding house parlor. He wanted to show her the town, to lay out the map of her new life. "This," he said, gesturing to the pine shed she had visited yesterday, "is Pastor Miller's church. We will, of course, be expected to attend every Sunday. Your father would approve." Lila nodded, her hands clasped in front of her. He pointed across the street. "That is the railroad office, my place of work, and next to it, the building they are raising will be the schoolhouse." He gave her a thin, proprietary smile. "Your domain, my dear. We will civilize this place yet." They walked on, Edward pointing out the telegraph office, the land surveyor's tent, and the new sturdy lockup. He spoke of the house they would have. It was not built yet, but the lot had been purchased by the company. It would be near the depot, convenient for his work. It would have 2 rooms and a porch. It would be safe. The word echoed in her mind, feeling less like a comfort and more like a cage. It was a life predictable and tidy, a life laid out like the neat, precise figures in Edward's ledger, a life without passion, without surprise, without the terrifying, wild beauty of the red cliffs that watched them from the horizon. Their walk brought them to the wide, swinging doors of the dusty Star Saloon. Even at this hour, well before noon, the sound from within was a rough chorus of male voices and clinking glass. A woman with hair the color of a faded sunset was sweeping the boardwalk in front. She nodded at them, her eyes sharp and knowing, lingering on Lila. "That is Martha Quinn," Edward murmured, steering Lila slightly away. "She runs that establishment. Not a place for you, of course." Lila could not help but look inside, through the gloom. She could see cavalrymen in their dusty blue, rough men in canvas trousers who must be the railroad crew, and a few others whose only uniform was the gun belted low on their hips. Their voices were loud, carrying easily on the dry air. "They should have strung him up yesterday," one voice boomed. "That Navajo, Yazzie. Why wait? A rope is good law." "Briggs is marching him out this afternoon," another replied. "Holloway wants it done quiet. But I say, let's have some sport. Hang 'em high tonight. Show the rest of 'em what happens when they mess with the railroad." A cheer went up. Lila's stomach turned. She felt the blood drain from her face. Edward, noticing her pause, tugged her arm impatiently. "Come along. Lila, it is just saloon talk, not for your ears." Before she could take a step, one of the men stumbled out of the saloon, a tin cup of whiskey in his hand. He was a big man, bearded and filthy, with a hired gun's cold eyes. He saw Lila, and his face split into a gap-toothed grin. "Well, now," he slurred, stepping directly into her path. "Look what the stage brought in. A little prairie flower. You lost Little Flower." He reached out and grabbed her arm. His grip was like a steel trap, his thumb digging into her flesh. Lila cried out, a small, sharp sound. "Sir, release her," Edward said. His voice was thin, reedy. He put a hand on the man's shoulder, but it was a hesitant, frail gesture. The big man laughed, shoving Edward back so he stumbled and nearly fell. "Get gone, paper pusher. The lady and I are getting acquainted." He pulled Lila closer, the smell of sour whiskey and unwashed body washing over her. "Let her go, you drunk fool." The voice was a woman's, sharp and clear. Martha Quinn, the saloon owner, stood there, the heavy broom held like a spear. Her face was hard. "She's the new school teacher, and she's with her intended. Get your paws off her." The man snarled, but his grip loosened for a second. Martha seized the opening, grabbing Lila's other arm and yanking her back, pulling her toward the saloon door. "Get inside. Honey, you are safe in here." It all happened at once. As Martha pulled Lila through the swinging doors, a shot exploded in the street, then another, and another. It was not a duel. It was a brawl. Men were shouting. Horses screamed. A group of 4 riders, their faces covered with bandanas, were trading fire with the cavalrymen who had spilled out of the saloon. Bullets thudded into the wooden walls. A window high above the saloon shattered, glass raining down onto the street. Lila turned, her heart leaping into her throat. Edward. He was standing frozen on the boardwalk, his face pale, his mouth open. He looked confused, as if he were trying to add up a column of figures that did not make sense. "Edward, get in here!" Lila screamed, pulling against Martha's grip. He took a step, his hand reaching for her, and then his body jerked. A strange, puppet-like twitch, a dark stain, small at first, then blossoming wide, appeared on his clean white shirt. He looked down at it, his expression one of mild surprise. Then his eyes rolled back, and he crumpled forward onto the dusty street. Lila's scream was lost in the roar of gunfire. She tore free from Martha and stumbled out onto the boardwalk, falling to her knees beside him. "Edward, Edward." "No." She grabbed his shoulder, trying to turn him over. He was heavy, a dead weight. The dust around him was turning dark and muddy. The shooting was wild now. Men firing at shadows, the air thick with acrid smoke. No one was paying attention to her. The soldiers were trying to form a line. The hired guns were firing from behind water troughs. Everyone was saving his own life. "Oh, looky here." Lila looked up. A second man, this one a railroad worker she had seen earlier, was looming over her. His eyes were wide and crazed, drunk on the whiskey and the violence. He grinned, showing broken teeth. "The boyfriend's dead. Looks like you need a new one, sweetheart." He lunged, grabbing her by the hair, yanking her head back. Lila screamed, her hands flying up to claw at his face. He laughed and backhanded her, the force of the blow sending her sprawling into the dust next to Edward's body. She was terrified, paralyzed. She saw his boots approach. She was going to die here, or worse. A shadow moved, impossibly fast, from the alley beside the livery. It was not a soldier. It was Kelly Yazzie. His chains were broken, a link of heavy iron still dangling from one wrist. He must have been in the stable, waiting for transport, and broken free in the chaos. He moved with a deadly, silent grace. The railroad worker who was advancing on Lila never even saw him. Kelly slammed into the man's back like a panther, one arm wrapping around his throat, cutting off his air. The man gurgled, his hands dropping from his gun belt to claw at the arm that was crushing his windpipe. Kelly drove a knee into the man's spine, and he went limp. Kelly did not stop. He ripped the revolver from the man's holster, a fluid, practiced motion. He turned to Lila. His face was a mask of fury, his dark eyes burning. He grabbed her arm, his grip just as strong as the other man's, but the intent was wholly different. He hauled her to her feet. He did not speak. He shoved her, hard, behind a stack of rain barrels by the livery wall. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl. Lila huddled behind the barrels, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She was in shock. Her world had just been turned inside out, upside down, and torn to pieces in the space of a minute. The man her fiancé had paid, the man her society called civilized, had just tried to rape or kill her. The man her society called a savage, a murderer, had just saved her life. The neat, tidy lines of her world, the lines of good and bad, safe and dangerous, were gone, washed away in blood and dust. The gunfire was tapering off. The 4 bandaged riders were gone, galloping out of town as fast as they had come, leaving chaos behind. The soldiers were reforming, their rifles raised. Captain Briggs, his face red with fury, stormed into the street. "Where did they go? Find them, and find that prisoner." A soldier pointed toward the livery. "Captain, over there." Briggs spun, his pistol drawn. He saw Kelly Yazzie standing over the unconscious form of the railroad worker. The man's pistol still in his hand, he saw Lila, half hidden behind the barrels, her dress torn, her face bleeding from where the man had struck her. Briggs did not hesitate. He did not ask. He saw what he expected to see. "Savage," he roared. "He's got the woman. He started this, take him." Kelly saw the soldiers advancing, their rifles leveling. He knew, with absolute certainty, what was about to happen. He looked at Lila, his eyes holding hers for one brief, intense second. He did not try to run. He did not try to explain. He just gave her one last, sharp command. "Run." He tossed the pistol away from him, a gesture of contempt, and turned to face the soldiers empty-handed, his head high. "Don't!" Lila screamed, but it was too late. The soldiers were on him, the butts of their rifles rising and falling. They beat him to his knees, then to the ground. They were shouting, cursing him, calling him a filthy animal. Lila Monroe stood, frozen, in the middle of the street. The dust was settling, coating everything in a fine, red powder. A few feet to her left lay the body of Edward Kane, the man who had promised her a safe, passionless future. A few yards to her right, the man who had just saved her life, the man everyone called a murderer, was being dragged away in chains, his face a bloody ruin, leaving a dark trail in the red dust. She looked at one, and then the other. The neat, orderly world of Ohio, of her father's sermons, of right and wrong, was 1,000 miles away. It was not black and white here. It was only blood and dust and a terrible, aching silence. Edward's funeral was a hurried, sun-baked affair. Pastor Miller read from the Bible, his voice straining against the constant wind, but the words felt thin, unequal to the vast, indifferent landscape that had swallowed the young clerk. Lila stood by the raw pine box, her face veiled, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. She felt numb, not with grief for Edward, but with a dizzying sense of displacement. The life he had offered her, so dull and safe, was now just a shovelful of red dirt. That evening, Baron Holloway paid her a visit at the boarding house. He brought flowers, absurdly bright wildflowers wilting in the heat, and offered his deepest condolences. He sat across from her in the parlor, his fine wool suit seeming to repel the dust that coated everything else. "A terrible tragedy, Miss Monroe," he said, his voice a low, sympathetic murmur. Edward was a fine young man, a true asset to the railroad, to progress. Lila merely nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I understand this leaves you in a delicate position," Holloway continued, leaning forward slightly. "A young woman alone in this territory. But I want to reassure you. The railroad looks after its own." He smiled, a paternal, comforting expression that did not match his cold eyes. "Your position as the town's schoolteacher is, of course, secure. We will need good, moral women like you to build a proper community here. All we ask in return is that you stand on the right side of things, that you support the law, and the men who are trying to bring order to this wilderness." The unspoken message was as clear as the glass in his hand. "Stay quiet. Do not cause trouble. Your safety is guaranteed." "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," Lila whispered. It was all she could manage. The very next day, the order he spoke of revealed itself. Captain Briggs and Holloway, with the town's nervous mayor presiding, convened what they called a civilian tribunal. It was held in the saloon, the only building large enough to hold the crowd of railroad men, soldiers, and fearful townspeople. Kelly Yazzie was dragged in, his hands chained behind him. His face was swollen and cut from the beating, but he stood erect, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the back wall, as if the entire proceeding was nothing but a minor, irritating noise. Briggs stood and read the charges. This man, Kelly Yazzie, a known hostile, did willfully incite a riot. He did attack the good citizens of Red Rock Crossing, resulting in the lamentable death of Mr. Edward Kane. He did assault and attempt to abduct Miss Lila Monroe. A murmur ran through the crowd. Men glared at Kelly. Lila, sitting in the front row where Briggs had insisted she sit, felt her stomach clench. It was all lies. A neat, terrible construction of lies. "We have testimony from several fine soldiers who witnessed the event," Briggs said, gesturing to two cavalrymen who stepped forward. One by one, they told their story. They said they saw the Navajo prisoner break free. They said they saw him fire the first shot. They said they saw him pull Mr. Kane into the street and then grab the woman. It was a flawless, rehearsed performance. Then Briggs turned his gaze to Lila. "Miss Monroe, our hearts break for what you have endured. Please, tell the tribunal what this savage did to you. Tell them how he attacked you after murdering your fiancé." Every eye in the saloon turned to her. She felt the heavy weight of their expectation. She saw Baron Holloway, watching her with that same cold, paternal smile. She saw Captain Briggs, his eyes like two chips of blue ice, daring her to contradict him. And she saw Kelly. He did not look at her. He continued to stare at the wall, his pride a shield around him. Lila stood. The floorboards felt unsteady beneath her feet. Her throat was dry. This was the moment. This was the test her father had always preached about. The moment of truth. She had to speak. She had to tell them about the drunken gunman, the one who had grabbed her, the one who had struck her. She had to tell them how Kayleigh had appeared from nowhere, how he had saved her, how he had shoved her to safety. She opened her mouth. She looked at Briggs. She saw the barely veiled threat in his stance. She saw the hired guns lounging by the door, their hands near their holsters. She saw the faces of the townswomen, looking at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. If she spoke the truth, what would happen? They would not believe her. They would call her a liar, or worse, an Indian lover. She would be an outcast, unprotected, her job gone. And Kaylee, would it even save him? No. They would hang him anyway, perhaps even faster, for the crime of having a white woman defend him. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced her resolve. She was one woman, alone. The weight of the entire town, of the railroad, of the army, was pressing down on her. Miss Monroe Briggs prompted, his voice like silk over steel. Lila's gaze dropped to the floor. "It all happened so fast," she whispered, her voice trembling. There was shooting, so much shooting, and Edward, he just fell." "And the prisoner?" Miss Monroe Briggs pressed. "He grabbed you, did he not?" Lila's mind was screaming. Tell them he saved you," but the words would not come. She was a coward. She saw her father's disappointed face in her mind. He was there," she stammered. "He came at me. I was so frightened. I hid behind the barrels." It was a half-truth, a miserable, cowardly evasion. It was not what Briggs wanted, not the clear condemnation, but it was not the truth either. She had not defended Keeley. She had not implicated him, but she had not saved him. She had saved herself. A wave of disgust for her own weakness washed over her. She sat down, her body shaking. In the crowd, she saw Martha Quinn, the saloon owner, watching her. Martha's face was unreadable, but her eyes held a trace of something Lila thought was pity. Kelly, for the first time, turned his head. He looked directly at Lila. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no accusation. There was only a vast, cold contempt, a contempt that was worse than any hatred. He turned away again, dismissing her. Briggs, seeing he would get no more, scowled, but it was enough. "There you have it," he announced to the room. "He was involved. The situation is clear. Given the volatile nature of the prisoner and the risk of further unrest, I am ordering him transferred to Fort Wingate for a full military tribunal." A buzz went through the room. Fort Wingate was 3 days' ride away. Baron Holloway stood, raising a hand. "A wise decision. Captain, justice must be served, but it must be orderly. We cannot have mob rule." He smiled, his victory complete. The obstacle, Kelly Yazzie, would be removed. The railroad's path was clear. Lila knew, with a sickening certainty, that Kelly Yazzie would never arrive at Fort Wingate. An ambush on the trail, a prisoner shot while trying to escape. It would be so simple. That night, Lila sat in her room, the one Edward had paid for. She did not light the lamp. She watched the sliver of a moon rise over the red cliffs. She had failed. In the first true test of her life, she had chosen safety over truth, cowardice over gratitude. The man who had saved her life was going to be murdered, and she had given the order herself with her silence. From her window, she could see a single campfire burning at the edge of town, where the transport detail was camped for the night. They would leave at first light. She heard the yip and howl of a coyote on the ridge, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed the emptiness inside her. This was wrong. It was a profound, terrible wrong. A soft knock came at her door. Lila opened it to find Martha Quinn, holding a small tray with a piece of bread, some cheese, and a cup of water. "You have not eaten all day," Martha said, not asking, but stating a fact. She stepped into the room, placing the tray on the small washstand. She was older than Lila, her face lined with a life Lila could not imagine. I am not hungry," Lila whispered. Martha looked at her, her gaze steady. "He saved your life, did he not?" Lila's breath hitched. She could only nod, tears finally spilling over, hot and shameful, on her cheeks. "I thought so," Martha said, her voice low. "I saw it. I saw that drunkard go for you. I saw the Navajo take him down." "Why did you not say anything?" Lila cried, her voice cracking. "And who would listen to me?" Honey, Martha said with a dry, humorless laugh. "The town procuress. I would have been thrown in the street before I finished my first sentence." You were the only one they would have listened to. The pastor's daughter, the grieving fiancé. I was scared, Lila admitted, her voice small. I know, Martha's expression softened. Just a little. You are a girl from back east. You do not know the rules here. She moved to the window, looking out at the same fire Lila had been watching. Out here, girl, the law is not what is written in a book. It is what is written in money and blood. Baron Holloway has the money. Captain Briggs has the blood. And you just got caught in the middle. But if you do not pick a side, one gets picked for you, and you just let them pick it. Martha turned back, her hand on the doorknob. You got a choice to make before that sun comes up. You can be the safe, quiet schoolteacher in Baron Holloway's town, and spend the rest of your life knowing you let an innocent man die, or you can do something else. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Lila stared at the closed door. Martha's words, sharp as a spur, had pierced her numbness. If you do not pick a side, she was right. By staying silent, Lila had chosen Holloway's side. She had chosen the side of the men who had let Edward die, the men who had lied, the men who were now going to commit murder. Her spine stiffened. A cold, unfamiliar resolve settled over her. She was a coward. Yes, but maybe not for one more day. She moved quickly. She packed her valise, the same one she had arrived with. She took the primers, the Bible. She left the muslin wedding dress in the bottom of the wardrobe. She put on her sturdiest boots and her warmest shawl. She had a few dollars left, money her father had given her. It would have to be enough. At the first hint of dawn, she slipped out of the boarding house. She made her way to the livery, where the army supply wagon was being hitched. A young, bored-looking corporal was checking the harnesses. "Excuse me?" Lila said, her voice shaking only slightly. The corporal looked up, surprised. "Ma'am." I am the new schoolteacher," she said, forcing a calm she did not feel. "I have been instructed to travel to Fort Wingate. They are arranging a teaching post for me there, now that my circumstances have changed." The corporal frowned. "I do not have any orders about a passenger, ma'am." It was arranged by Captain Briggs himself. Lila lied, her heart pounding. "He said to tell you I was to be given transport. He was very insistent. Something about protecting me after the terrible ordeal." At the mention of Briggs's name, the corporal's demeanor changed. He did not want to be on the wrong side of the captain. "Oh, well, all right, ma'am. If the captain said so. You can ride up on the seat, but it ain't gonna be comfortable." "Thank you, Corporal," Lila said, letting him help her up. A few minutes later, the small detail formed up. 4 soldiers on horseback, the wagon, and behind it, 2 more soldiers. In the middle of them, walking, his hands chained to the saddle of one of the guards, was Kelly Yazzie. He saw her on the wagon seat. His expression did not change. He just looked through her, as if she were a ghost. The wagon lurched forward, and the small procession left Red Rock Crossing, heading out into the vast, empty desert just as the sun began to bleed red light over the eastern mountains. Lila did not know what she was going to do. She had no plan. She only knew she was on the wagon. She had chosen a side. They rode for hours. The heat built. The dust was a constant, choking cloud. The soldiers joked among themselves. Passing a canteen, they offered none to the prisoner. Late in the afternoon, they entered a narrow stretch of canyon. The red rock walls rose high on either side, closing them in. The air grew still, oppressive. The lead riders slowed, their eyes scanning the ridges. This was a perfect place for an ambush. And then it came. Not a warning, not a shout, just the sharp crack of a rifle from the rocks above. One of the lead soldiers grunted and fell from his saddle. Before his body hit the ground, a volley of gunfire erupted from both sides of the pass. It was not a few rifles. It was at least a dozen. The soldiers scrambled, diving for cover, returning fire at unseen enemies. The wagon driver screamed as a bullet tore through his shoulder. and he fell from the seat. The horses panicked, rearing and pulling the wagon sideways, blocking the trail. Lila was thrown from the seat, landing hard on the rocky ground. The air was filled with smoke, the roar of guns, and the screams of men and horses. Through the chaos, she saw the two soldiers guarding Kele. They were not fighting. They were looking at each other, and then at the prisoner. One of them slowly unholstered his pistol. He was not aiming at the ridges. He was aiming at Kele. This was it. This was the plan. The fake ambush. The prisoner shot while trying to escape. Lila did not think. She only moved. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the fallen driver's heavy pistol from the wagon seat. It was huge in her hand. She ran, stumbling, toward Kel and the two soldiers. They were focused on the prisoner, raising their guns. "No!" she screamed. She raised the pistol with both hands, her arms shaking, and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening, the recoil slamming her backward, but her shot, wild as it was, made the soldiers jump. They turned, shocked to see her there. In that 1 second of hesitation, everything changed. Kele moved. He lunged, chains and all, at the guard whose saddle he was tied to. He slammed his shoulder into the man, knocking him clean off the horse. He used the chaos of the fall to twist, grabbing the second soldier's gun arm, biting down, savage and desperate, on the man's hand. The soldier screamed and dropped his pistol. Gunfire was still raining down from the ridges. The hired guns were not discriminating. They were shooting at everyone, just as Holloway must have planned. To make it look real, a bullet struck the rock near Lila's head, spraying her with stone chips. She had a choice. Run, hide, scramble up the rocks and find safety, or move toward the man she had betrayed. Kele was on the ground, struggling with the soldier, trying to get the keys to his chains. The first guard, the one he had knocked from the horse, was getting to his feet, raising his own pistol, aiming it straight at Keel's back. Lila ran forward, shouting his name, and threw her entire body against the soldier just as he fired. His shot went wide. The force of her tackle sent them both sprawling. The soldier grunted, hitting his head on a rock, and lay still. Kele had overpowered the other man. He now had the keys. He was fumbling with the lock on his chains. He looked at Lila, who was breathless on the ground, staring at the man she had knocked unconscious. Her eyes were wide with a terror and an adrenaline she had never known. He snapped the chains open. He grabbed the fallen soldier's rifle. He ran to Lila, yanking her to her feet. "This way," he shouted, pulling her toward a narrow split in the canyon wall she had not even seen. Now, she did not hesitate. She ran with him, bullets kicking up dust at their heels, leaving the chaos of the fake ambush behind, and plunged into the dark, narrow passage, disappearing into the red heart of the land. The guard was on his feet, the one Kele had knocked from the horse. He was raising his pistol, his face a mask of fury, taking dead aim at Kele's back as the Navajo struggled with the other man. Lila saw it. She was still on the ground from her fall. She did not think. She screamed, a raw sound of animal terror, and launched herself forward. Scrambling across the few feet of rocky ground, she threw her body, not at the soldier, but at Kele, pushing him, trying to cover him. No. The gun exploded. It was a deafening roar next to her ear. She felt a searing, unbelievable pain, as if a hot poker had been laid across her left shoulder. The force of it, or perhaps her own momentum, sent her crashing into Kele, and both of them fell to the ground in a heap of dust and chains. The chaos was total. The soldier, shocked, fumbled to recock his weapon, but the searing pain that shot through Lila's arm had galvanized Kele. He had seen her fall. He had seen the blood blossom on her dress. A guttural roar came from his chest. He used the momentum of their fall, twisting with the last of his chains, and kicked out. His boot connected with the soldier's knee, shattering it. The man screamed and went down. Kele was on his feet in an instant. He grabbed the fallen man's knife from its sheath. He found the keys on the other guard's belt. He did not bother with the lock. He jammed the knife blade into the heavy iron link of his wrist chains, set it against a rock, and smashed it with another stone. The iron snapped. He did the same for his ankles. It took seconds. He was free. He grabbed the nearest rifle, checked its load, and then hauled Lila to her feet. She was dizzy, her vision blurred, her shoulder on fire. "Can you run?" he demanded. She nodded, biting back a cry of pain, clutching her arm. "Good." He did not wait. He grabbed her good arm and pulled her, stumbling, past the panicking horses and the bodies of the soldiers. The gunfire from the ridges was still intense, a deadly crossfire. Holloway's men were thorough. Kayleigh pulled her toward a dark split in the canyon wall, a fissure no wider than a man's shoulders. He shoved her in first and followed right behind her, the rifle in his hand. They plunged into the cool darkness, leaving the sound of the battle, the smoke, and the dying behind. The news that would spread back to Red Rock Crossing was simple and brutal. The transport had been ambushed by a large Navajo war party. All the soldiers were killed. The prisoner, Kelly Yazzie, had been freed. And the white woman, the schoolteacher Lila Monroe, had been taken. She was not a victim. She was an accomplice. She had been seen helping the savage, firing on the soldiers. Baron Holloway and Captain Briggs now had exactly what they needed. Not just a renegade warrior, but a white woman who had turned against her own. They had a story. They had a pretext for a war. The order went out Kelly Yazzie and Lila Monroe, fugitives, to be shot on sight. They ran. Kelly led her through a maze of narrow, twisting passages. The canyon was a labyrinth, a place where the world turned on its side. Sometimes they were wading through ankle-deep sand, sometimes scrambling over rock falls. Lila's city boots were torn to shreds. Her feet were bleeding. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, sickening ache. The sun beat down, finding them even in the narrow slots. The heat was a physical weight, reflecting off the red rock until she felt she was walking inside an oven. Her thirst was a living thing, a fire in her throat that sandpapered her every breath. This land was not beautiful. It was a killer. It was vast, empty, and trying to end her. Several times she stumbled, her vision fading. Each time, Kelly pulled her up, his grip like iron, his voice a single, harsh command: "Keep moving." He did not offer comfort. He offered survival. He moved with an animal's knowledge, his eyes constantly scanning the rock formations, the ground, the sky. He was reading the land, following a map she could not see. He led her up a sheer rock face, pointing out handholds her untrained eyes would never have found. He found a small seep of water, a dark, damp stain on the rock, and showed her how to press her lips to it, to suck the barest, metallic-tasting moisture from the stone. It was not enough, but it kept her conscious. When the sun finally began to dip, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, they stopped. He had led them to a wide, shallow cave, a great arch of stone scooped out of the cliff face. From here, they could see for miles, back the way they had come. No one was following. Not yet. Lila collapsed onto the sandy floor, her body trembling with exhaustion, the pain in her shoulder. Now that the adrenaline was gone, was a deep, nauseating throb. Kayleigh ignored her for a moment. He gathered dry brush, and with a knife and a piece of dry yucca stalk, he made a fire. He was patient, his hands moving with an economy she had never seen. In moments, a small, smokeless fire was burning. He came to her. He did not ask permission. He took his knife and slit the sleeve of her dress from cuff to collar. Lila flinched, but she was too tired to protest. He looked at the wound. The bullet had torn a long, raw groove across the flesh of her shoulder. It was bloody, filled with dirt, but the bullet had passed through. He left, returning moments later with a handful of broad, grayish leaves. He chewed them into a poultice, a green, bitter-smelling mash, and packed it directly into the wound. Lila hissed. the sting worse than the bullet itself. But Kaylee held her arm steady. "It will stop the poison," he said. It was the first full sentence he had spoken to her. He tore a clean strip of cloth from her petticoat and bound the wound tightly. He gave her water from a small skin he had taken from the soldier. It was warm and tasted of leather, and it was the most wonderful thing she had ever known. He gave her a piece of dried meat, hard as wood, and she gnawed on it, the salt and smoke bringing a little life back to her. The desert night fell like a stone. The temperature plummeted. The heat of the day vanished, replaced by a wind that cut to the bone. Lila shivered, her teeth chattering. Kaylee had a single blanket roll, also from the soldiers. He sat with his back against the rock wall, the rifle across his lap. He motioned for her to sit. She hesitated. He sighed, an impatient sound, and pulled her down, sitting her next to him, her back against his. She could feel the hard, lean muscles of his back, the steady warmth of his body. She was pressed against him, a man she barely knew, a man her people called a savage. Yet she felt no fear of him. She was terrified of the desert, of the soldiers, of what she had done. But not of him. He had not touched her, not in any way that was not necessary. He had been almost rough in his care, his focus entirely on their survival. She was grateful. She was wary. And she was utterly, profoundly confused. She closed her eyes, the pain in her shoulder a dull drum, and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, her back pressed against his. They traveled for 2 more days. They saw no one. They moved only in the early morning and late evening, resting in the deep heat of the afternoon. On the 3rd day, as they crossed a high mesa, Kelly stopped. He pointed. Below them, a young Navajo boy was slumped against a rock, his leg bent at an odd angle. He was trying to aim a bow, his hands shaking. Kaylee called out in his own language, a sound that was both sharp and melodic. The boy started, his eyes wide with fear, then recognition. Kaylee scrambled down the slope, Lila following carefully. The boy was Talo, perhaps 16 years old. His leg was bleeding from a long gash, and his ankle was swollen. He had been in a skirmish with a cavalry patrol 2 days prior. He explained, his voice a mixture of bravado and pain. Kele examined the leg. He was not gentle, his hands probing, but Talo did not cry out. He only watched Kele with a look of pure hero worship. Kele nodded, satisfied. He cleaned the wound, applied more of the same poultice, and then, with 2 strong pieces of greasewood, he splinted the boy's ankle, binding it tightly. He showed Talo that he was not just a warrior. He was a protector. He lifted the boy, surprisingly light, and set him on his own shoulders, carrying him. They walked for another half-day, Talo giving directions, his voice growing stronger. They entered a hidden valley, a place of small, scattered cornfields and a few sheep. In the center, almost invisible against the red earth, was a hogan, the traditional 8-sided house of the Navajo. An old woman emerged. She was ancient, her face a map of 1,000 wrinkles, her hair white as alkali salt. She was old woman Ashki, her eyes black and bright as a bird's. Took in the scene Kele, the white woman with her arm in a sling, and Talo, injured. She spoke to Kele in their language, her voice like the rustle of dry corn. Her gaze on Lila was not kind. It was filled with suspicion, with a deep, old anger. Kele spoke back, his voice low and firm. He spoke for a long time. Talo added his own words, gesturing to Lila. Finally, the old woman was silent. She stared at Lila for a long, uncomfortable minute. Lila stood, her head high, meeting the old woman's gaze as best she could. She would not show fear. At last, old woman Ashki nodded, a single, sharp dip of her chin. She looked at Lila and spoke, her English broken but clear. He says you saved him. The boy says you are brave, but you are white. You bring the shadow of the soldier with you. She paused. looking up at the vast, cloudless blue. But the sky brought you here. You have come to the right place, though you do not know why. You will see, enter. Lila spent the next days in that hogan, in that small, hidden community. She watched. She saw a life she had never known. She saw people who prayed to the rising sun, who saw spirit in the corn and the rock and the wind. She saw women grinding corn on a stone, laughing, their children playing at their feet. She saw a world that was not savage. It was just different. It was hard, but it was whole. Her teacher's instinct, the part of her that had carried primers across the country, woke up. She found a piece of charcoal and, on the back of a map she had in her valise, she began to write. She wrote down the words she heard. She sketched the plants Ashki used. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was a witness. Kele was gone for long stretches, scouting, hunting. Talo's leg began to heal. The boy would sit with her, practicing his few words of English, proudly telling her the names of the gods. One evening, Kele returned. He stood before her. "It is not safe for you here," he said. "If the soldiers come, this place will be the first they burn. Ashki and the others can hide. You cannot." Lila's heart sank. "Where will I go?" "I have a place," he said. "It is mine. It is on the edge of Red Sky Canyon. You will be safe there." He led her out of the valley, up a steep, hidden trail. They walked for an hour, emerging onto a high rim. The world fell away at their feet. Below them, bathed in the last light of the sun, was a canyon so vast and red it looked like a wound in the earth. It was beautiful, terrifying, and sacred. And there, built against the cliff wall, tucked under a massive overhang, was a small cabin. It was not a hogan. It was made of squared logs, with a shingle roof and a real glass window. But it was also not a white man's cabin. The door was painted with Navajo symbols. Dried herbs hung from the porch. It was a place of two worlds. It was his. "Here," he said, pushing open the door. "You will stay here." He looked at her, his face unreadable in the twilight. "This is where the fight begins." The cabin became her world. It was small, just one room, but it was solid. Kele had built it himself, and it was a marvel of practicality. The walls were thick, chinked with mud and grass. There was a stone fireplace that drew well, a sturdy table, a bed built into the wall, and shelves holding clay pots, dried herbs, and a few precious books in English Shakespeare, a copy of Moby Dick, and a worn leather Bible. It was a place of deep, quiet contradictions. Her shoulder healed. The Navajo poultice working a magic her father's medicine chest never had. It left a long, puckered scar, a permanent mark of her new life. She spent her days in the small, hidden valley with old woman Ashki and the others. She learned to grind corn, her good arm aching with the effort. She learned the Navajo words for water, fire, sky, and stone, to ko, ya, tch. They were words that felt like the things they named. In return, she taught. The children, shy at first, then bold and curious, would gather around her. She used her charcoal and the back of the old map to draw letters. A is for Atsa, eagle. B is for Bish, knife. Talo, his leg now healed into a slight limp, would sit with them, proud to show off the few English words he knew, prouder still to correct her pronunciation of Navajo. They were small moments of peace, fragile islands in a sea of tension. Lila felt a purpose she had not felt in Red Rock Crossing. This was a real school. Kele was often gone, sometimes for days, scouting the movements of the soldiers, observing the railroad crews. When he was at the cabin, a silence settled between them. It was not an unkind silence. It was watchful. He would sit by the fire in the evening, cleaning his rifle, his hands moving with fluid, economical grace. One night, she found the courage to ask, "Why this place?" "Kelly, why Red Sky Canyon? There are other canyons," other mountains. He did not look up from his work for a long moment. The firelight played over the strong planes of his face, the bruises long since faded, leaving only the hard lines of his ancestry. "This is the place of my mother's people," he said, his voice low. "It is where the stories began." He stopped, and she thought that was all he would say. But then he continued, his voice taking on a distant, hollow tone, as if he were speaking of things he had buried very deep. "When I was a boy, the soldiers came. They had blue coats, like Briggs. They said we had to leave. They rounded us up like sheep. Hundreds of us, thousands. They called it the Long Walk." He set the rifle aside. He looked into the fire, but his eyes were seeing something else, something from long ago. "We walked for more than 400 miles, to a place called Bosque Redondo. It was a bad place. The water was poison. The land was flat and empty. There was nothing to hunt." His voice grew rougher. "My little sister, she was 6 years old. She was not strong. The cold came. We had no blankets. We had no food." He paused, his jaw tightening. She did not cry, not once. She just got quieter. One morning, my mother tried to wake her, and she was cold. She was hard, like a piece of frozen wood. Lila's hand flew to her mouth, a small gasp of horror. "My mother wanted to bury her," Cale continued, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "The soldier on his horse said we could not stop. He said we had to keep moving. My father tried to fight him. The soldier shot him. He looked at Lila, his eyes black and empty. We left them both there, on the flat, frozen ground. Just left them. I was older. I was 12. I ran that night. I slipped away. It took me 2 months to walk back here. I hid in the rocks. I ate snakes. I followed the stars. I came back to this canyon. I found Ashki. She had hidden. Others had hidden. We survived. I made a promise then, to my sister's ghost, to my father's blood in the dirt. I would never leave this land again. I will never be marched away. And I will never let them take this canyon. It is all we have left." Lila sat in the silence, her heart breaking for the boy he had been, for the man he had become. All her life, she had been taught that civilization was a righteous thing. Her father preached from the pulpit about the duty of good Christians to tame the wilderness, to bring the light of God to the lost tribes. The railroad, Edward had told her, was the very artery of that civilization, bringing progress, law and order, and now she saw the lie. The civilization she knew had a dark, bloody underside. The railroad was not an artery of progress. It was a steel knife cutting through the heart of a people. The law was not order. It was Captain Briggs and a rope. The light of God was not a sermon. It was the flash of a soldier's rifle, murdering a father for wanting to bury his child. She looked at Kile, a man who had suffered the very worst of her world, and she felt a profound, burning shame. The fragile peace was shattered 3 days later. Talo, his limp more pronounced from his hurry, half fell into the cabin. He was breathing hard, his face streaked with sweat. "Soldiers," he panted, speaking in a mix of Navajo and broken English. "Many soldiers. They ride from the fort. And more men with guns, not soldiers. They ride from the town." Kelly was on his feet in an instant. "Where?" "They are making a big camp, south of the pass, where the railroad men are. They have many wagons, many guns." Talo fumbled inside his shirt and pulled out a piece of paper, crumpled and stained. "I found this on the trail from town." It was a flyer, printed on cheap paper. Lila's blood ran cold as she read the large, black letters. "Wanted, Kele Yazi, for murder and incitement of riot, reward." And beneath it, in smaller letters, "Reward, for the rescue of Miss Lila Monroe, kidnapped and held captive by the aforementioned savage." "Captive?" Lila whispered, her voice shaking with a cold rage. "They are calling me a captive." She looked at Kelly, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. This is not just about the canyon anymore. It is about me. I am the excuse. They are starting a war, and they are using my name to do it. They have always had an excuse, Kele said, his voice hard. If not you, it would be a stolen cow. If not a cow, a broken fence. But this is better for them. A white woman. It makes their blood hot. We have to see what they are doing, Lila said, her mind racing. We have to know where they plan to enter the canyon. I will go, Kel said, already checking his rifle. I am coming with you, Lila stated. It was not a request. He looked at her, ready to argue. Do not, she said, her voice firm. I am the captive. I will not hide in this cabin while they use my name to murder your people. I need to be a witness. He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. They left Talo to watch from the ridge and traveled south, keeping to the high, hidden trails Kaylee knew. It took half a day of hard climbing. From a high ledge, they could look down on the railroad's base camp. It was a small, bustling town of tents and wagons, and Talo was right. A full company of cavalry was there, their blue uniforms and precise lines a stark contrast to the chaotic camp of hired guns next to them. She saw Baron Holloway's fine tent. She saw Captain Briggs, pointing at a map, his orders ringing out across the camp. They were preparing for an invasion. They will come through the main pass, Kel said, his voice a low growl. It is the only way to bring the big wagons, the ones with the black powder. They mean to blast their way through, Lila whispered, horrified. They watched until the sun began to dip, noting the sentry positions, the number of horses. They had to go. But as they turned to leave, the world changed. The wind, which had been fitful all day, suddenly stopped. The air grew thick, still, and an unnatural yellow light fell over the rocks. What is it? Lila asked, a new fear prickling her skin. Sandstorm, Kel said, grabbing her arm. We must find cover, now. It came on them with the speed of an attacking army. The sky went from yellow to a deep, bruised purple, and then the wind hit. It was not a wind she had ever known. It was a solid wall of sand and grit that screamed, a high, terrifying shriek, like 1,000 mourning women. It blasted them, stinging any exposed skin, stealing the breath from their lungs. Visibility dropped to 0. The world vanished, replaced by a roaring, suffocating cloud of red dust. Lila cried out as she was knocked from her feet. Kaylee did not let go. He pulled her, crawling, behind a large boulder that offered the barest lee from the wind. It was not enough. The wind howled around it, trying to peel them away. We cannot stay here, he shouted over the din. He was crawling, pulling her. She could not see where they were going. She trusted his grip. He led her to a shallow depression, a place where a larger slab of rock leaned against the cliff face, creating a small, triangular space barely big enough for one person. He shoved her in first, then crowded in behind her, shielding her body with his own. The space was incredibly tight. Lila was pressed back against the cold stone, and Kelly was pressed against her, his chest to her back, his arms braced on either side of her head, holding them both against the fury of the storm. She could feel everything, the solid, steady beat of his heart against her shoulder blade, the hard muscles of his chest and stomach against her back, the warmth of his body, a living furnace against the biting cold of the wind. His breath was warm on her hair. She was enveloped by him. Her fear of the storm was still there, but it was muffled, kept at bay by his physical presence. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, two small, living things huddled together, while the world tried to tear itself apart outside. She had never been so close to any man, not even Edward. This was not chaste, it was not proper. It was essential. It was two people, a man and a woman, clinging to each other to survive, and it woke something in her, a feeling so deep and powerful it frightened her almost as much as the storm. When the wind finally began to die, dropping from a scream to a mournful moan, they were both stiff, covered in a fine layer of red dust. Kel moved, slowly, backing out of the small space. The air was cool and clear, the world scrubbed clean, but the intimacy of their shelter lingered. He did not look at her. He helped her to her feet, his touch impersonal, and then immediately moved away. Checking the ridge, he was a warrior again, his face a hard mask, but something had shifted. He knew it, and she knew it. The wall of respectful distance he had kept between them had been breached, not by choice, but by the land itself. The journey back was tense. The storm had changed the landscape, and they had to find a new path. It was almost dark when they knew the valley. Kel stopped, his head lifting. He sniffed the air. "Smoke," he said, "too much smoke." He broke into a run, Lila scrambling to keep up, her heart pounding with a new dread. They came to the edge of the mesa overlooking the small, hidden camp where Ashki and the others lived. It was gone. The hogans were burning, bright orange fires against the deep blue twilight. Men on horseback, not soldiers, but men from Red Rock Crossing, were riding through the camp, whooping and firing their pistols into the air. She recognized one, a foreman from the railroad. This was not a military action. This was a mob. They were kicking over water barrels, tearing up the small cornfields. An old man who had tried to stop them lay on the ground. Lila saw women and children scattering, running for the rocks, screaming. And then she saw her, a little girl, no older than 5, the same one who had learned the letter B from Lila. She was running, but she tripped and fell. A small, carved wooden doll, her only toy, flew from her hand. She sat in the dirt, not crying for her burning home, but reaching for the doll, her small face a mask of grief. One of the men on horseback, a big man with a beard, laughed. He spurred his horse forward, guiding it deliberately, and the animal's heavy hoof came down on the small wooden doll, crushing it into the dirt. The girl let out a wail, a sound of such pure, absolute heartbreak that Lila felt it in her own chest. She started forward, a cry of rage in her throat, but Kel's arm shot out, grabbing her, pulling her back into the shadows. "No," he whispered, his voice shaking with a fury that was almost beyond control. "We cannot. There are too many." They could only watch, hidden, helpless, as the men finished their brutal work and rode off, laughing, back toward town. Lila sank to her knees, the rage replaced by a cold, sick emptiness. This was the civilization she had been raised to believe in. Not hymns and primers, but this, drunken men on horseback, terrorizing women and crushing the last toy of a weeping child. Later, at the cabin, the survivors gathered. Ashki was safe, as were Talo and most of the others. They had hidden in the caves, but the camp was destroyed. Their winter food was gone. One of the elders, a man whose face was hard with grief, pointed a shaking finger at Lila. He spoke in Navajo, his voice harsh and accusing. Talo, his face pale, translated reluctantly. He says this is your fault. He says you are the white woman who brought the soldiers. He says Kele has forgotten his people for a white woman's face, and now the curse is upon us." Lila flinched as if struck. The man's words were a new kind of pain. She looked at Kelly, desperate for him to defend her. But Kelly was staring into the fire, his face a mask of stone, his own guilt and doubt warring within him. She was truly alone. The white world called her a traitor, a whore who had run off with a savage. The Navajo world called her a curse, the source of their suffering. She belonged nowhere. She turned and fled the cabin, choking on her sobs, running to the rim of the great canyon. She stood there, feeling utterly, completely lost, a ghost between two worlds. She did not hear old woman Ashki approach. The old woman stood beside her for a long time, both of them staring into the vast, dark emptiness of the canyon. "They are afraid," Ashki said finally, her voice quiet. "Men are always afraid." They blame the new thing. You are the new thing. He is right, Lila whispered, tears streaming down her face. If I had not come. Then they would have come for another reason, Ashki said, cutting her off. They came before you were born. They will come after you are gone. They want the land. You are just the story they are telling themselves today. She pointed up. The sky was a brilliant, cold spray of stars. There was no moon. You see him, Ashki asked. Yeah, the sky. He is the great witness. He watches all. He sees the truth, even when men cover it with lies. He saw Kayleigh's sister die. He saw you save Kayleigh from the soldiers. He sees your heart now. She looked at Lila, her ancient eyes sharp. The cost of walking a new path is high. You will be hated by both sides. He will be hated. But sometimes, a path must be burned. She paused, her gaze returning to the stars. Some pears are not meant for a long, quiet life. Some must burn like a shooting star, so bright it hurts the eyes. But when they do, they make the whole sky bright. Just for a moment. And the sky, he remembers that light forever. The accusation from the elder had been brutal. His name was Hasba, a respected warrior whose son had died on the Long March. He had stood before the small, displaced council, his fingers shaking as he pointed first at Kayleigh, then at the cabin where Lila was. She is the reason. Hasba's voice, harsh with grief, echoed in the small valley. You brought the white woman here, and the shadow of the soldier followed. You protect her, but who protects us? The fire that burned our homes was lit by her people. Her skin is the color of the enemy. You have traded your people for a pale woman. You betray the memory of your sister. Kelly had stood like stone, his face impassive. But Lila, watching from the trees, saw the muscles in his jaw bunch. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply turned his back on the elder, a grave insult, and walked away, striding up the path toward his cabin. Lila followed him, her heart a cold stone of guilt. She was the source. She was the curse. She hurried, her torn boots slipping on the rocks. She reached the cabin just as the sky, which had been a clear, metallic gray all day, opened up. It was not a storm like the sandstorm. This was rain, a true driving desert rain, cold as ice, a rarity in this land. It came down in solid, wind-driven sheets. Just moments before, they had been running, scrambling up the cliffs after a near-disastrous encounter with a cavalry patrol. They had spotted the glint of a spyglass from the canyon rim and had to run for 2 miles, bullets chipping the rock behind them, before slipping into a fissure. They were already soaked with sweat and fear. Now, the cold rain hit them, soaking them to the skin in seconds. Lila stumbled into the cabin, shivering violently, her hair plastered to her face. Kelly was already at the hearth, his back to her, but he was not moving. He was just standing there, dripping onto the stone floor, his shoulders rigid. He finally moved, grabbing dry juniper from the wood box. He began to build a fire, but his hands were shaking. Lila stared. She had never seen his hands shake. Not when he faced soldiers, not when he set Talo's leg, not when he made fire in the wind. But they were shaking now. A fine, violent tremor. It was anger, raw and deep, and it was something else. The kindling sparked. He built the fire with mechanical, jerky movements, the flames slowly catching, casting wild shadows on the log walls. The rain hammered on the shingle roof, a relentless, deafening drum. It sounded like the world was ending. The sound, the cold, her guilt, and his shaking hands, it all broke inside her. "It is my fault," she burst out, her voice raw. "What he said, Hasba, he is right. I am the reason." Kelly did not turn. He poked the fire, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "I am the curse," she choked, tears mixing with the rainwater on her face. "I am the one who brought this. If I had never come, if I had never left Red Rock Crossing." She was crying now, deep, tearing sobs of guilt and rage, I am so sorry. I am sorry I was a coward in the town at that trial. This made him stop. He turned, slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were burning with a torment she had not seen before. I should have told them, she wept, pacing the small room, her hands clenched. I should have stood up and told them all, that you saved me, that the white men, the civilized men, were the ones who let Edward die, that they were the ones who put their hands on me, all my life. My father told me, he preached about savages. He talked about heathen souls that needed saving, and then I came here. She stopped, standing in the middle of the room, shaking with cold and emotion. They are the savages. Holloway, Briggs, that drunken man in the street. They are. And you, who they call a murderer. You saved me. You protected me. You gave me your blanket. You have not once been anything but decent. You have respected me more than any man in my entire life. And I paid you back by staying silent. I let them call you a criminal. She sank onto the small stool, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I betrayed you. I betrayed my own conscience. Hasba is right. I am the curse. The cabin was silent, save for the roar of the rain and her own choked sobs. He stood by the fire, the light painting one side of his face in orange, the other in shadow. You are not the curse, he said, his voice quiet but rough, as if it hurt him to speak. You are just the reason, the excuse. Ashki was right. If not you, then something else. He walked to the single window, staring out into the black, driving rain. Hasba is an old man. He lost his son. He sees a white face, and he sees the soldier who killed him. He is not wrong to hate. But he hates you now, Lila whispered, looking up, because of me. He hates me, Kelly agreed, his voice flat, because I am torn. He sees it. They all see it. He turned from the window, his face a landscape of agony. Do you know what I'm afraid of? White woman. He had not called her that in a long time. I am not afraid of Briggs. I am not afraid of Holloway's guns. I am not afraid to die. I died 12 years ago, on the long walk. He took a step toward her. I am afraid of choosing. Hasba says I have chosen you over my people. And if I do, if I choose the woman who looks like the enemy, then I lose everything. I lose my people. I lose my right to this land. I become a ghost, like my sister, a man with no home. His voice dropped, becoming a raw whisper. But if I do not choose you, if I turn you out, if I send you away to save my place with the tribe, then I am the man who lets his sister die again. I am the man who stands by and watches the soldier kill. I am the man who values his own safety over the life he has sworn to protect. He stood over her now, his hands clenched at his sides. He was trapped. She saw it. He was not torn between love and duty. He was torn between two different ways of being destroyed. I hate you, he whispered, his voice breaking. I hate you for coming here. I hate you for making me see you. And I hate you for making me feel this. The tension in the small cabin was a physical thing. It was the air itself, electric, humming, like the moment before a lightning strike. The rain, the fire, the confessions, their shared danger, their time in the sandstorm. It all coalesced. He was standing so close. She could feel the heat from his body, still damp, smelling of rain and smoke and the desert. She looked up at him. Her tears stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. And he looked down at her. The anger in his eyes was still there, but beneath it was the raw, undeniable truth of his confession. The want, the fear, the desperation. Neither of them knew who moved first. It was not a decision. It was an inevitability. It was gravity. His mouth came down on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hard, desperate. It was clumsy. Born of a need so long suppressed it was almost violence. It was a kiss of anger and grief and a terrible, aching hunger. His lips were chapped, tasting of salt. His hands, those shaking, strong hands, came up, one to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her wet hair, the other gripping her uninjured shoulder, pulling her up from the stool and against him. Lila's world exploded. Everything she had ever been, the pastor's daughter, the proper lady, the frightened girl, it all burned away in that instant. She kissed him back with the same desperation, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, holding on as if she were drowning. It was a kiss that said everything they could not speak. It was, "I am sorry, and I am lost, and I am terrified, and do not let me go." He broke the kiss, his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing hard, their bodies pressed together. He was shaking, or maybe she was. "Kele," she whispered, her voice a sound she did not recognize. He did not answer. He simply lifted her. It was effortless. He carried her the 2 steps to the built-in bed, the one with the Navajo blankets, and laid her down. Lila lay there, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it would break. The firelight flickered over them. The rain was a wild drum on the roof. This was it. The moment her whole life had warned her against. She was a virgin, raised in the strictest, most moral household, and she was on the bed of a Navajo warrior, a man her world called a killer. She was terrified, and she had never, in her entire safe, bloodless life, wanted anything more. He stood over her for a moment, his shadow cast long by the fire. He was watching her, reading her face. He saw the fear. He saw the desire. Slowly, he unfastened his knife belt and let it fall to the floor. He sat on the edge of the bed. He did not lunge. He did not grab. He moved with a sudden, agonizing tenderness that undid her more than his anger. He reached out a hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing the dampness from her cheek. "You are shaking," he whispered. "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I know," he said. He leaned down, his face close to hers. He did not kiss her mouth. He pressed his lips, warm and firm, to her forehead. It was a blessing. He kissed the scar on her shoulder, a gesture of honor, and then his lips brushed hers, so lightly, asking a question. She gave the only answer she had. She lifted her hand, her fingers tracing the high, hard line of his cheekbone. He kissed her then. Truly, it was slow. It was careful. It was an exploration, a mapping of new territory. It was a promise. He was learning her and letting her learn him. It was a kiss that held all the time in the world. He pulled back, his dark eyes holding hers, his face serious in the firelight. He spoke, his voice a low, rough whisper that seemed to blend with the sound of the rain. "Sky will watch us make love," he said. His hand moved to the simple buttons of her dress, his touch reverent. "And I will choose you, no matter how angry the sky becomes." She closed her eyes as he bent to her again. There was no more fear. There was only the rain, the fire, and the solid, undeniable truth of his body. It was a joining that was not about sin, or civilization, or savagery. It was about 2 people, pushed to the very edge of their worlds, finding the only home they had left, and they found it in each other. Later, they lay tangled in the blankets. The fire burned down to glowing embers. The storm had passed. Outside, the world was silent, washed clean, the air smelling of wet earth and juniper. They whispered in the dark, not of the past, not of the fight that was coming. They whispered of a future that seemed impossible. "If we live," he said, his voice quiet, his arm holding her tight against his side. "When this is done, we will not hide. Not you, not me. We will stand, here, in this cabin." "As a family," she whispered, testing the word. It felt strange and solid, facing both. He did not answer, but his arm tightened. It was enough. When she woke, he was gone. Lila sat up, pulling the blanket around her bare shoulders. She felt new, The body she had woken up in was not the same one she had gone to sleep in. She was no longer Lila Monroe, the teacher, the captive, the runaway, the guest. She was his. She was the woman who had chosen her side, her man, and her fate. The consequences were real, and they would be terrible. But for the first time in her life, she felt completely, terrifyingly whole. She dressed and went outside. The dawn was breaking, clear and sharp after the rain. The air was cold, making her breath cloud. The canyon below was filled with mist, a great white sea. Kelly was standing on the very rim, a few yards from the cabin. He was stripped to the waist, his arms outstretched, his head tilted back. He was facing the rising sun, a sliver of brilliant orange on the horizon. He was speaking, not to her, he was speaking in Navajo, his voice low and powerful, a chant, a prayer, a vow. She did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. He was offering his promise to the new day, to the clean, rain-washed air. He was speaking to the sky, the great witness. He was vowing to protect this land, Red Sky Canyon, and to protect her, the woman he had chosen. He was vowing it with his blood, his breath, and his life, until the last star fell. He finished, lowering his arms. He stood, silent, as the sun's first ray touched his face. He had made his choice. The fight was no longer just for his past. It was for their future. The word came just after dawn, carried by Talo. His face was streaked with sweat, his horse lathered. He had run a patrol nearly to Red Rock Crossing and back. "They are moving," he said, his English short, the words like chips of stone. He spoke to Kelly, but his eyes kept finding Lila. All of them, the blue coats, the gun hands. They have the big wagons, the black powder. They are coming for the main pass. Kelly nodded once, his face grim. The time for scouting, for waiting, was over. He sent Talo to the hidden camp to gather the warriors. There were not many, perhaps 20 men who could truly be called fighters, along with old men and boys who would have to fight like men. A few hours later, as the small band of Navajo warriors gathered in the hidden valley, 2 more riders appeared. Lila recognized one. It was Tom Booker, the black cowboy from the town. The man with him was a stranger, a quiet, weathered white man with a rifle across his lap. Tom dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate. He nodded to Keeley, then tipped his hat to Lila. "Ma'am, Keeley, I reckon you knew this was coming." "We knew," Kelly said. "Well," Tom continued, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. Holloway finally showed his hand, shorted me and a few others on our pay, said our work was done. Then we saw him ride out with Briggs and every hired gun he could find. Me and Jed here. He motioned to the other man. We do not like getting cheated, and we do not much care for a man who uses the army to clear his personal property. He patted his rifle. So we figured we would come settle our account. We are not looking to fight the United States Army, but we are damn sure willing to fight Holloway. Kelly stepped forward and clasped Tom's hand. "Your fight is our fight. We are glad you are here." The group was small, a handful of Navajo, 2 cowboys. Kelly gathered them in the shadow of a great boulder. "They are many," he said, his voice quiet but carrying. "We are few. They have the black powder. We have this." He swept his hand up, indicating the towering red walls of Red Sky Canyon. "This is our home. This is our fortress. They do not know the high trails. They do not know the passages. We will fight from the rock. We will make them bleed for every foot they try to take. We fight for the land. We fight for our families. We fight for the memory of those who were stolen from this place." Lila stepped forward. She was not the woman who had arrived on the stagecoach. The weeks in the desert had burned her skin, and the grief and fear had tempered her. She wore a pair of rough canvas trousers and a shirt Talo had found for her. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Tucked into her belt was the heavy revolver that had belonged to Edward Kane. Kelly saw her and his face, already hard, grew harder. "No, Lila, you will go with Ashki and the women, to the high caves." "You will not send me away," Lila said. Her voice did not shake. "They are marching here under a banner with my name on it. They call me the captive. I will not hide in a cave while you die in my name. I am not a prize to be rescued. Kelly, I am a part of this. I am a part of you." "Lila, this is not a fist fight in the street. This is butchery. They mean to kill us all." "I know what they mean to do," she said, her voice dropping. "I saw them burn the camp. I saw what that man did to the little girl's doll. I am not that girl from Ohio anymore." She put her hand on the butt of the pistol. "I cannot shoot like you or Tom, but I can load. I can carry water. I can be a witness. I will not hide. I will not be a coward again." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. He saw the iron there, the thing that had been forged in the ambush, in the storm, in his arms. He saw a warrior, as fierce in her own way as any of his. He gave a single, sharp nod. "You will stay with Tom Booker," he commanded, "behind the thickest cover. You will do exactly as he says. You will not show yourself. That is my price." "Agreed," she said. They moved to the main pass. It was the only way through the canyon wide enough for wagons. The walls rose sheer on both sides. 1,000 feet of red stone. It was a natural killing floor. Kele placed his men with care. He, Talo, and the strongest warriors took to the high leaden, hidden in the crags. Tom Booker, his friend Jed, and Lila took a position in a massive jumble of boulders lower down, a natural fortress that commanded a view of the canyon mouth. They had piled stones, ready to be rolled. The weight was the worst part. The sun climbed to its zenith, beating down into the canyon, turning the rock floor into a skillet. The air was still, heavy, vibrating with heat. Lila felt the sweat trickling down her back. Her mouth was completely dry, her tongue thick. She checked Edward's pistol again. It was loaded. She had extra cartridges in her pocket. Beside her, Tom Booker was still, his face calm, his rifle resting on the rock. "They will be loud," he said, his voice a low rumble. Not looking at her, "It will be scary. You keep your head down. Do what I say. When you shoot, do not aim for a man. Aim for the rock in front of him. A bullet that bounces is just as deadly, and it makes them twice as scared." She nodded, unable to speak. Then they heard it, the faint jingle of harness, the metallic clink of canteens, the groan of wagon wheels. They came into view, a line of cavalrymen, walking, their rifles held at the ready, fanning out into the pass. Behind them, the hired guns, a rough mob, laughing and joking. And behind them, the heavy wagons, piled with crates. Riding at the back, on a magnificent black horse, was Baron Holloway, his suit impeccable. Beside him, Captain Briggs, his face grim, scanned the cliffs. "This is a box, Holloway," Briggs said, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "A perfect trap. I do not like it." Holloway laughed, a dismissive, arrogant sound. "Nonsense. Captain, it is a corridor. We have the strength, we have the will. They are just a few savages in the rocks." He raised his gloved hand, pointing forward. "Send your men and clear the path we push through for civilization." The words still hung in the air when the attack began. It was not a rifle shot. It was Kell. He stood for a single second, a bronze statue against the blue sky, and loosed a single arrow. It was tipped with burning pitch. It sailed in a high, perfect arc and plunged deep into the canvas cover of the lead wagon. The canvas exploded into flame. It was the signal. The canyon erupted. From every ledge, from every crevice, Kelly's men and the two cowboys opened fire. The effect was devastating. The soldiers, caught in the open, yelled and scattered. Horses screamed, rearing and falling. The hired guns, caught between the soldiers and the rocks, fired wildly, their bullets screaming off the canyon walls. ricocheting, striking their own men. The pass was filled with smoke and yelling, and the terrible, echoing crack of rifles. Lila flattened herself behind the boulder, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst. The noise was a physical blow. "Stay down," Tom Booker yelled. He was firing. A steady, rhythmic boom. Click. Boom. "Jed, watch the left, Lila. Load this." He tossed her his spare rifle. Her hands were shaking, but she did as she had been taught. Powder, ball, ram, cap. Her fingers were clumsy, but she did it. She slid the rifle back to him. "Now, shoot," he yelled. "Make noise." Lila raised Edward's pistol, bracing it with both hands as Tom had shown her. She saw a soldier trying to hide behind a small rock. She did not aim at him. She aimed at the flat wall of rock behind him. She squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked, the sound deafening, the recoil slamming her bad shoulder. She cried out, but she saw her bullet hit the wall, spraying stone chips. The soldier yelped and ducked, his nerve broken. She felt a wave of nausea, followed by a cold, hard resolve. She ducked back behind the rock, her ears ringing, and began to reload. The fight raged for an hour. The soldiers were trapped, taking casualties. But Briggs was a good officer. He had his men form a defensive line behind the wagon. Using it as a breastwork, they were returning fire, disciplined volleys that kept the Navajo pinned. Holloway's men were trying to get to the base of the cliff, to set the dynamite charges. Then, the world changed. The sky, which had been a clear, burning blue, suddenly darkened. A wind, cold and violent, tore through the pass, swirling the gun smoke, and the rain came. It was a cloudburst, a torrent of almost solid water. It was as if a river in the sky had broken. The world vanished in a gray sheet. In seconds, the canyon floor was a churning, slick river of red mud. The soldiers and gunmen roared in frustration. Their powder was soaked. Their footing was gone. The slick, treacherous rock and the sticky mud became a new, terrible enemy. But for Kelly and his men, it was a gift. Now Kel's voice was a roar that cut through the storm. For your sister, for your sons. He and his warriors came down from the cliffs. They did not climb. They slid, using the water, moving like mountain lions. They had been born on this rock. The rain made them faster. They landed among the hired guns with knives and war clubs. The fight became a brutal, hand-to-hand melee. The soldiers, trapped behind their wagon, could not fire without hitting their own allies. From her rock, Lila saw Talo. The boy was fighting with a reckless fury. He saw two of Holloway's men, huddled against the second dynamite wagon, desperately trying to light a fuse. They were going to blow the wagon, to try and bring the cliff wall down on Tom's position. "Talo, no wait!" Kelly shouted. But Talo was not listening. He was consumed by the fight. He saw the fuse spark. He ran, sliding through the mud, and threw himself at the burning fuse. He grabbed it, yanking. It was stuck. The two gunmen turned, surprised, raising their pistols. Boom! Tom Booker's rifle fired, and one of the men fell. The other fired at Talo. The bullet struck the boy high in the chest, throwing him back, but Talo did not fall. He gave one last, desperate pull. The fuse came free, sputtering. He threw it into the mud just as two of Kelly's warriors descended and finished the other gunmen. Talo slumped against the wagon wheel, his chest a terrible ruin, but he was grinning. He had saved the wall. The battle had turned. It was a rout. The hired guns were breaking, trying to flee back down the pass, only to be met by a shower of rocks from the old men posted at the entrance. Captain Briggs saw it all falling apart. His face was a mask of cold fury. He was wounded, his arm bleeding. He saw Kelly fighting near the wagon, and then he saw her. Lila. Her head was up, watching Talo, her face pale. Briggs raised his revolver. He took careful aim, not at Kella, at her. He would break the warrior by killing his woman. Lila Kell's voice was a scream. He had seen it. He had seen the shift in Briggs's aim. Kelly did not think. He moved. He threw himself across the intervening space just as Briggs fired. He did not try to stop the bullet. He just tried to be in its way. He launched his body, crashing into Lila, slamming them both back against the hard rock. Lila felt the impact as he hit her, and she heard his sharp, pained grunt. He had taken the bullet meant for her. "Kelly!" she screamed, her voice lost in the storm. He rolled off her, clutching his side. Blood was already pouring through his fingers. He was hurt, badly, but he was alive. That was the moment Baron Holloway broke. This was not a business venture. This was a savage, bloody disaster. He saw his men dying, his dynamite soaked, his enemy still standing. He saw Kelly, wounded, but alive. He panicked. He yanked his horse's reins, turning the terrified animal. His only thought to flee. "It is a loss!" he shrieked at Briggs. "Retreat, retreat." He spurred his horse, galloping back toward the mouth of the canyon. But the old men on the ridge were not finished. They heaved a final volley of boulders. A large rock, loosened by the rain, crashed down. It did not hit Holloway, but it struck the ground directly in front of his horse. The animal screamed, rearing, its hooves finding no purchase on the slick, wet stone. It went down in a terrible, thrashing tangle of limbs. Baron Holloway was thrown clear. He landed, not as a king, but as a terrified, soft man, sprawling in the red, bloody mud. His fine hat was gone. His suit was ruined. He looked up, his face white with terror, at the grim, dripping forms of the Navajo warriors who were now surrounding him. His cowardice was exposed for all his men to see. The fight was over. Seeing Holloway captured, seeing their numbers destroyed, the last of the hired guns threw down their weapons. Captain Briggs, clutching his shattered arm, saw it was hopeless. He and the 5 or 6 soldiers still on their feet mounted a desperate, fighting retreat. They scrambled onto the remaining horses, firing back as they fled. Briggs gave one last look, a look of pure, undiluted hatred, at Keeley, who was now being held up by Lila and Tom Booker. Then he was gone, disappearing back into the rain. The canyon pass was suddenly, terribly silent, save for the sound of the rain and the groans of the wounded. Red Sky Canyon was safe. For now. But as Lila tore a strip from her shirt, pressing it hard against Kaylee's bleeding side, she looked at the bodies. She saw Talo being carried by 2 warriors, his life a fragile, flickering thing. She looked at the cowering, mud-soaked form of Baron Holloway, and she knew this was not the end. It was only the end of the beginning. The news of the battle in Red Sky Canyon hit the territory like a flash flood. It was one thing for a few soldiers to skirmish with hostiles. It was another for a full cavalry detachment, allied with a private railroad army, to be decisively routed, and for a man like Baron Holloway to be taken captive. The telegraph lines hummed. Within a week, a new and far more serious power arrived in Red Rock Crossing. They did not ride in with fanfare. They arrived on a special train car Federal Judge Silas Croft, an older, stern man whose face looked carved from granite, and Federal Agent Elilas Thorne, a quiet, younger man in a city suit, who carried a heavy leather briefcase and missed nothing with his observant eyes. Word was sent to the canyon via Tom Booker, who had become the uneasy go-between. The United States government, in the form of Judge Croft, demanded a public hearing. All parties were to be present. Baron Holloway was to be released into federal custody. Kelly Yazzie and Lila Monroe were ordered to appear. Kelly was wounded, the bullet from Briggs having passed clean through the flesh of his side. It was a terrible wound, but it had missed bone. Ashki had packed it with herbs, and Lila had bound it, but he was weak, his face tight with constant pain. Talo was worse. The bullet in his chest had been a near-fatal one. He was alive, but just barely, breathing in shallow, painful gasps. "You cannot go," Lila insisted, her hands on Kel's uninjured shoulder. "You are in no condition to ride. It is a trap." "It is not a trap," Keel said, his voice a low rasp. He was already pulling himself to his feet, using a long stick as a support. "It is a different kind of war. This judge, he is not Briggs, Agent Thorne. He has been asking questions about Holloway and other towns for 6 months. Tom told me, this is not a soldier's court. This is the one place we might find a law that is not written by him." He nodded toward the pass, where Holloway was being held. They rode into Red Rock Crossing 2 days later. It was a spectacle. Calu rode, stiff and proud, flanked by Tom Booker and his friend Jed. Lila rode beside him. She was not the woman who had fled. She wore canvas trousers and a man's shirt. Her hair was braided. She met the stares of the townspeople with a coldness that matched their own. They looked at her as if she were a creature from another species. The hearing was held in Pastor Miller's small church. It was the only building, aside from the saloon, that could hold the crowd. And it was packed. The air was hot and smelled of sweat, dust, and fear. The town was split. Half the faces were filled with hatred for the Navajo, for the men who had defeated the soldiers. The other half, the poorer folk, the prospectors, the small ranchers who had been bullied by Holloway's water rights and land grabs, looked on with a quiet, hungry curiosity. Judge Croft and Agent Thorne sat at a table at the front, where the pulpit should have been. Baron Holloway sat to one side, his arm in a fine silk sling, his face a mask of noble indignation. Captain Briggs was there, his own arm bandaged, his uniform pressed, his face a thundercloud. Kaylee and Lila were directed to sit on a simple bench on the other side. It looked, for all the world, like a trial. "This is not a trial," Judge Croft began, his voice a gavel that silenced the room. "This is a federal hearing to determine the facts surrounding the armed conflict in Red Sky Canyon. The Army is involved. Civil land contractors are involved, and federal railroad interests are involved. My purpose is truth. Agent Thorne is here as an observer for the Department of the Interior, which has an open investigation into Mr. Holloway's corporate practices." This first announcement sent a ripple through the room. Holloway's composure tightened. "Mr. Holloway," the judge said, "you were held captive. Please, tell this hearing what occurred." Holloway stood. He was a magnificent performer. He looked at the judge, his face a picture of a reasonable man pushed to extremes. "Your Honor, it was a horror. This savage," he pointed a dramatic finger at Kella, "has been a thorn in the side of progress for a year. He incited a riot in this very town, which led to the death of a fine young railroad employee. Then, he kidnapped this poor, impressionable woman, Miss Monroe." He gestured to Lila, his voice dripping with false pity. "He took her into the wilderness, held her captive, and clearly poisoned her mind. When Captain Briggs and I, under military authority, attempted to rescue her and secure the railroad's legal right-of-way, we were met by a coordinated, savage ambush. We were not attackers. Your Honor, we were victims of an insurrection. This man is a murderer, and his actions are an act of war against the United States." A low, angry murmur of agreement came from the railroad men in the crowd. Judge Croft made a note. "Captain Briggs, your turn." Briggs stood, stiff as a rifle barrel. "Your Honor, my testimony is simple. I was operating under my sworn duty. 1, to protect federal property, namely the railroad survey. 2, to rescue a white woman, Miss Monroe, who had been abducted. We were met with overwhelming, organized force. This was not a skirmish. It was a pre-planned massacre, led by the extremist Kelly Yazzie." He looked at the townsfolk. "This man and his renegades are a threat to every man, woman, and child in this territory. Peace will only be restored when he is held accountable. Justice, in this case, Your Honor, is a rope. It is the only thing that will reassure the good people of this town." The hatred in the room was a palpable thing. Lila could feel it pressing against her skin. Judge Croft was silent for a long moment. Then, his gaze fell on Lila. "Miss Monroe, You seem to be the center of this entire bloody affair. You are listed as abducted. You are the object of a military rescue. You have heard the testimony of these two gentlemen. Please, stand and tell this hearing what happened to you." "This was it. The second test. The second trial." She stood, her legs unsteady. Every eye was on her. She saw Baron Holloway's reassuring smile, a silent promise of safety if she just played her part. She saw Captain Briggs, his eyes daring her to defy him. She saw the women of the town, their faces pinched with judgment, ready to condemn her. She could be the victim. She could say yes, she was terrified. She was brainwashed. Thank God they had come to save her. It would be so easy. She could have her old life back. A new, safe position. A quiet existence. Kaylee would hang. The canyon would be lost. But she would be safe. She looked at Kelly. He was staring straight ahead. At the judge. His face was pale from blood loss. But his pride was a fortress. He expected nothing from her. He had already seen her fail once. Lila took a deep breath. She remembered her cowardice in the saloon. She remembered Kaylee's contempt. She remembered the cold night, the rain, and the vow she had made to herself. "I was not kidnapped," she said. The room exploded. Shouts of Lilar and harlot filled the church. Judge Croft slammed his hand on the table. "Silence, silence. Or I will have the marshals clear this room, Miss Monroe. You will continue, and you," he glared at the crowd, "will listen." Lila's voice, when she spoke again, was quiet, but it carried in the stunned silence. "I was not kidnapped. I was saved." She started at the beginning. She told them everything. The day I arrived, my fiancé, Edward Kane, was killed. He was killed by a stray bullet in a gunfight that was not started by the Navajo. It was a street brawl, and in that chaos, I was not attacked by Kelayazi. I was attacked by one of Mr. Holloway's railroad workers. He struck me. He tried to... She faltered, then found her strength. He tried to rape me while my fiancé's body was lying in the street. A gasp went through the room. "The soldiers," she continued, her voice gaining power. "The men who were there to protect, they did nothing. They were saving themselves. The man who saved me was Kelayazi. He was in chains, and he risked his own life to save mine." She looked at Briggs. "And then I was brought to a hearing, just like this one, in the saloon. And I was a coward. I was afraid of Captain Briggs. I was afraid of all of you. So I lied. I stayed silent. I let them call him a criminal." She told them about the ambush on the transport. I went on that transport to try and undo my cowardice. And I saw the truth. It was not a Navajo ambush. It was an assassination. Mr. Holloway's own men, disguised as bandits, attacked the soldiers, their own allies. As a plan to murder Kayla, they shot me. We did not run. We fled for our lives. Now came the hardest part. Her voice dropped, but it was clear. They say I was a captive. I was not. I went with him. I stayed with him. I lived in his cabin. In all that time, he never once laid a hand on me in anger. He protected me. He fed me. I was safer in Red Sky Canyon with a man you call a savage than I ever was in this town with the men you call civilized." She turned, her gaze falling on Holloway. This was never about a kidnapped woman. It was about land. It was about greed. Baron Holloway wanted that canyon. He bribed, he lied, and he hired murderers to get it. He used the United States Army. He used my name. And he used your fear to start a private war so he could steal land from people who have lived there for 1,000 years. She finished, her body shaking, her throat raw. The silence in the church was absolute. It was broken by a woman in the front row, a merchant's wife, who sneered, her voice loud in the quiet. She lived in his cabin. She lay with him. She is an Indian's whore. The dam broke. The room filled with a low, ugly buzz of overlapping voices. Virgin lay in his cabin. The whispers were vicious, shaming. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. She had told the truth, and it had only condemned her. She stood alone, shaking, as the full weight of their judgment fell on her. Clap! A single pair of hands. Clap, clap! Martha Quinn, the saloon owner, was on her feet at the back of the church. She is telling the God's honest truth. Martha's voice was a rough bark. I saw it all. I saw that hired gun go for her in the street. I saw her try to pull Edward to safety. This girl has more courage than any 10 men in this room. Clap, clap! Tom Booker stood up, his tall frame imposing. I was with them. I fought with them. It was not a massacre. It was a defense. We were outnumbered 5-1. We fought against men who were paid by Holloway to clear that land, and we fought against soldiers who had no business being there. A few others stood, a poor prospector near the back. Holloway's men diverted the creek from my claim. He starved me out, an old rancher. He calls them savages. But his men burned my neighbor's barn. The applause was not universal, but it was real. It was a small, growing wave of defiance. Before the room could dissolve into a riot, Agent Elilas Thorne stood, holding up his hand. He opened his heavy leather briefcase. Thank you, Miss Monroe, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. Your testimony, under oath, has provided the final piece of a puzzle my office has been assembling for 6 months. He pulled out a ledger. This is Baron Holloway's private acquisitions ledger. It details cash payments to a security force that matches the description of the men who ambushed the Army transport. He pulled out a sheaf of letters. This is correspondence between Mr. Holloway and his investors in San Francisco. He boasts, in his own hand, that he has secured a tame captain who will use military maneuvers to pacify the native problem, clearing the way for the railroad, all for a modest fee to the captain's personal accounts. The room went dead silent. Captain Briggs turned a shade of pale white. That is a lie. It is libel. I am a United States Army officer. Agent Thorne looked at him, his eyes cold. Captain Briggs, your decision to use federal troops and resources to prosecute a private land war, to falsify military reports, and your clear conspiracy with Mr. Holloway, which resulted in the deaths of your own men, will be the subject of a full court-martial. Marshal, he nodded to the man at the door, take this officer into custody. You cannot, Briggs roared. But the marshal was already on him, pulling his arms behind his back. Holloway was on his feet, his face purple. This is an outrage. I am a respected citizen. I am a builder of this nation. You cannot. Judge Croft struck the table. Mr. Holloway, you are a citizen who will stand trial in a federal court for conspiracy, fraud, bribery of a military officer, and 30 counts of accessory to murder. You are under arrest. As the marshal cuffed a stunned and sputtering Holloway, the judge turned to the room. This hearing is over. Baron Holloway and Captain Briggs will be transported to face justice. He held up his hand as a cheer started. As for the matter of Red Sky Canyon, by the authority vested in me by the United States government, I am issuing a federal injunction. All railroad activity in this sector is hereby halted. The canyon is declared a temporarily protected territory, pending a new and fair treaty negotiation with the Navajo people who reside there. It was a total victory. Lila felt a wave of dizziness. She gripped the bench. They had won. What about them? A voice shouted from the crowd, pointing at Kelly and Lila. He still killed those soldiers in the pass, and she is no better. What about them? The brief surge of applause died. The hatred and suspicion returned, stronger now. Judge Croft frowned, the lines on his face deepening. The legal battle was over, but the social one was just beginning. Mr. Yazzie, this court finds that you and your people acted in self-defense against a private army committing criminal acts. You are not charged. You are free to go. He looked at Lila, his expression a mixture of pity and respect. Miss Monroe, you are also free to go. The hearing was over. The marshals led Holloway and Briggs, bound in chains, out of the church. The crowd began to file out, but they did not leave. They gathered on the street, forming 2 silent, angry lines. Kell stood, wincing as he put weight on his side. He held out his hand to Lila. She took it. Together, they walked down the center aisle of the church. The people did not shout. They did not throw things. They just stared. The women looked at Lila with open contempt. The men looked at Kayleigh with a cold, murderous hatred. They stepped out into the blazing sun. The crowd parted for them, a sea of silent, hostile faces. They were not prisoners. They were not going to be hanged, but they were not welcome. They were not forgiven. They were outcasts. Lila looked up at Kayleigh. He met her gaze, his face grim, but his hand was firm in hers. Together, they walked through the gauntlet, past the last houses, and took the dusty path that led back toward the red rocks, leaving the town behind. They had won their war, but they were now a family of two, belonging to no world but the one they had made together. The walk back to the canyon was long and silent. The sun beat down on them, but the heat of the town's hatred felt worse. They were pariahs, marked and cast out. The gauntlet of staring, hostile faces had been more draining than the battle. They had won in the judge's book, but in the book of Red Rock Crossing, they had lost. The whispers followed them, a poison in the air. Indians whore. The words clung to Lila, a stain she could not wash off. Kayleigh walked with a rigid straightness, his hand never leaving the stick he used for support. His side was a fire of pain, but he would not show weakness. Not here, not in front of them. He had not looked at Lila, but his hand, when they had cleared the last hovel, had found hers. His grip was weak from his wound, but it was there. It was enough. When they finally reached the high trail and the town was a mere smudge of dust below, they stopped. Lila gave him water from the skin. He drank, his face pale and drawn. "They hate us," Lila whispered. It was not a question. "They hate what they do not understand," Kayleigh said, his voice a rasp. "They hate that we are not broken. They hate that you spoke a truth they did not want to hear. And they hate me, because I am still here." They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the cliffs of Red Sky Canyon in shades of blood and fire. It had never looked more like a fortress, or more like a home. It was the only place on earth that would have them. They were no longer fugitives, but they were not free. They were exiles, living on a sliver of land between two worlds, belonging to neither. Old woman Ashki was waiting for them. She had seen them coming. She looked at Kel's side, at the fresh blood seeping through the bandage, and clucked her tongue. She said nothing of the hearing. She simply pushed Kel toward the bed and began to heat water, her hands moving with the slow, deliberate motions of age. Talo was there, lying on a cot in the corner. He was alive. His breathing was a shallow, painful whistle, and his face was gray, but his eyes were open. He was too weak to speak, but he watched them, a fierce, protective light in his young eyes. The boy who had been a reckless child was gone. In his place was a man who had paid the price for his new maturity and blood. The days that followed were a quiet, slow recovery. Kel's wound was deep and festered in the heat. He was consumed by fever, and for 3 days, Lila and Ashki fought for his life. Lila sat by his bed, wiping his face with cool, wet cloths, forcing water between his cracked lips. Ashki chanted, her voice a low, reedy hum, and applied poultices that smelled of pine and damp earth. In his fever, Kayleigh was not in the cabin. He was back on the long walk. He cried out in the night, words in Navajo, a string of names. Lila knew one, his sisters. He would thrash, his hands clenched, fighting an invisible soldier, begging someone to stop. Astza, he would cry. "Little woman, do not sleep. It is too cold. Do not sleep." Lila would not wake him. She would simply take his hand, the one not clenched in a fist, and hold it. She would speak, her voice low and steady, not about the past, but about the present. "You are home, Kelly. You are in the cabin. The rain is gone. The sun is on the canyon. I am here. You are not cold. You are safe. Slowly, his nightmares would recede. He would come back to the present, his eyes opening, finding hers in the dim light. He would see her, and the terror would fade, leaving only the deep, bone-weary sadness. He would hold her hand, his grip like steel, until he fell back into an exhausted sleep. She was his anchor, the only thing that kept him from being washed away by the ghosts of his past. Talo healed faster. His youth was a fire that burned away the sickness. The bullet had missed his heart by an inch. He would carry the scar, a ragged map across his chest, for the rest of his life. As he regained his strength, he changed. The bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful intelligence. He sat for hours, listening as Lila taught the few small children who now gathered outside the cabin, their families having moved to the hidden valley near the canyon's rim. One day, Talo pointed to the primer in Lila's lap. "Teach me," he said, his voice still rough. "Teach me the words. The letters. All of them." "Why, Talo?" "The soldier, the judge, Agent Thorne, they spoke with paper," Talo said, his hand touching his chest. "Their paper has power, more power than a gun. I will learn the paper." And so, the school began. It was not a real school, just a few children, Talo and Lila, sitting on blankets under the wide overhang of the cabin. She used her primers. She used charcoal on smooth, flat stones. She taught them English. A is for apple, B is for bear, and in return, they taught her. A is for Atsa, B is for Bish. She drew maps of the canyon, labeling the springs, the sacred places. She taught them respect for their own land. And Talo helped translate, bridging the two worlds with his new, hard-won knowledge. One afternoon, two small, dirty faces peeked around the rocks. They were white children, the son and daughter of Jed, the cowboy who had fought with them. He had a small, failed claim nearby and had been one of the few to clap in the church. He had heard about the school. "Ma'am," he said, twisting his hat in his hands, "I ain't got no money, but my young'uns, they are growing up wild. Could they sit with yours?" Lila looked at the Navajo children. They stared at the white children. The two groups were rigid with suspicion. "Of course," Lila said, her voice bright. "There is always room." She sat them all in a circle, the two new children pale and frightened. She held up a piece of corn. "What is this?" she asked. "Nada," a Navajo child said. "Corn," said Jed's son. "That is right," Lila said, smiling. "Both. It is the same thing. It is our food. It is our life. It was a start." Old woman Ashki came to watch one day. She was weaker now. The long winter and the stress of the fight had taken their toll. She sat on a blanket, her back against the warm cabin wall, watching as Lila pointed to the letters, as Navajo and white children sounded out the words together. That evening, as the sun set, she sat with Lila on the canyon rim. For a long time, she said nothing, just watched the shadows fill the great space below. "You have done a good thing," Ashki said, her voice thin as dry grass. "It is a small fire, but it is warm." She looked at Lila, her black eyes, still bright, holding a new softness. "I was wrong about you. You are not a curse. You are a bridge, a painful one, but a bridge." She turned her gaze back to the canyon. "The sky," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "He watched you and Kelly in the cabin. He heard the promise you made in the rain. That was the fire. Now comes the hard part." She looked at Lila. "Now you must prove the vow was not just for one night. Now you must live it, every day. You must be the wood that keeps the fire burning, even when the wind blows." She leaned back, closing her eyes, as if the words had taken the last of her strength. The wind was blowing from Red Rock Crossing. Tom Booker and Martha Quinn were their only links to that world. They would ride out once a week, under the guise of a hunting trip or a supply run, bringing goods that could not be found in the wild: coffee, salt, flour, and news. The news was not good. "The town is poison." "Lila," Martha told her, her face grim, as she unloaded a sack of beans. "Holloway is gone, and Briggs is facing his court-martial. But that does not matter. The men he hired, the ones who got away, they are still here. They drink in my saloon and talk. They do not talk about Holloway. They talk about the school teacher who betrayed her race. They talk about the savage who beat the army. They think the judge was bought," Tom added, leaning against the cabin wall. "They cannot imagine that a white woman and a Navajo could win on truth. So they believe it was a conspiracy, that Agent Thorne was paid off by some other railroad in the East. They are not scared anymore. They are just mean." "You are not safe," Martha said, looking at Lila. "Not really. They will not come here. Not into the canyon. They are cowards. But you cannot go there. Not ever. You are a prisoner here, just as sure as if you were in their jail." Lila nodded. "This prison is my home, Martha, and I am not alone." But the fear remained. Kelly's side healed, leaving a puckered, angry scar. But the nightmares did not stop. Lila would wake to find him gone, and she would find him on the rim, standing, watching the pass, his rifle in his hand. "They will come back," he would say, his voice flat. "The blue coats. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but they will come. They always come back." Lila would not argue. She would just stand with him, her hand on his back, a silent, living presence. "I am here. We are here. Now." They began to build. They were not just surviving. They were making a life. Kelly, with Tom and Talo's help, dug a long, winding ditch from a spring high on the mesa, bringing a thin, steady trickle of water down to a patch of flat land near the cabin. Lila, with the women, planted corn, beans, and squash. They were fighting the desert. Not with anger, but with patience. They learned to read the sky, to predict the small, violent rains. The land was still harsh, but it was no longer an enemy. It was their partner, their stubborn, difficult, beautiful partner. One day, Tom brought a newspaper. It was 2 months old, from St. Louis. He unfolded it, his finger pointing to a small column on an inner page. The headline was "Small Inquiry into Western Railroad Grants." Lila read it aloud, her voice trembling slightly. It mentioned, by name, Baron Holloway. It spoke of his conspiracy, of the fraudulent use of military force. It questioned the legality of the land grants given to his company. It was not much. It was one small article in a paper 1,000 miles away. But it was something. "The wind is changing. Lila," Tom said, a rare smile on his face. "It is slow, but it is changing." That night, for the first time in a long time, Kelly did not wake from a nightmare. He slept soundly, his arm around her. The seasons turned. The brief, sharp winter gave way to a spring of impossible, bright wildflowers. The small patch of corn was green and healthy. Talo was now fluent, reading from one of Lila's primers to the younger children. The cabin felt more like a home than any place Lila had ever known. But something else was changing. Lila had been tired, a deep weariness in her bones that was more than the hard work. For the past 2 weeks, the morning ritual of grinding corn had left her nauseated, her stomach turning. She had dismissed it. It was the heat. It was the hard winter. But this morning, as she stood, watching the sun rise, she knew. She had seen it enough with women in Ohio, with the ewes in the Navajo flock. The signs were unmistakable. Her hands went to her belly, flat and unchanged. But she knew. She was pregnant. A wave of feeling so powerful, it stole her breath, washed over her. First, a joy so pure and bright, it was like the sun itself. A child of this land, a child of their love, a life. And then, just as quickly, a cold, sharp fear. A child of two worlds who would belong to neither. A child who would be hated by the town as a half-blood and viewed with suspicion by the tribe as part white. A child born into a war that was not over, born on a battlefield that was only in a temporary truce. What kind of world was she bringing this baby into? She stood on the rim, her hand on her stomach, and she cried, tears of joy, tears of terror. Kele found her there. He came up behind her, his steps silent. He saw her face, the tracks of tears. His hand went to his knife. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice low. "Scanning the canyon. Who is coming?" She turned, taking his rough, scarred hands in hers. She brought them to her stomach, pressing them flat against her. "No one is coming, my love," she whispered, her voice shaking. She looked up into his dark, searching eyes. "Someone is here." He did not understand. He frowned, confused. "Kele," she said, her voice finding its strength. "We are going to have a child." He froze. His hands, under hers, were perfectly still. He did not speak. He did not move. He just stared at her, his eyes wide, his mask of the warrior completely gone. He looked, for 1 second, like the 12-year-old boy on the long walk, seeing something so impossible he could not comprehend it. A life, a new life, a future. He did not shout. He did not smile. He simply pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her hair, and his body began to shake. He was not crying. It was something deeper. It was a lifetime of grief, of loss, of fighting, all of it trembling in the face of this one, tiny, impossible hope. A year passed, then another. The seasons turned over the high desert, and the land, in its slow, patient way, began to heal. The deep black scars of the dynamite blasts in the canyon pass were slowly softened by wind and rain. Grass, thin and tough, began to grow over the raw, churned earth where the battle had been fought. The railroad did not return. The great iron snake had moved south, looking for an easier, less bloody path through the mountains. Red Sky Canyon remained, a fortress of silence and red stone. The story of the fight, of the warrior and the white woman who had stopped the army, was told in whispers around campfires and in saloons, growing with every telling, a new legend for a new land. In the cabin, in the heart of the second winter, life narrowed to a single, white-hot point. The snow had fallen for 2 days, sealing the canyon in a deep, profound silence. It was time. Lila lay on the bed, her body drenched in sweat, her hands knotted in the blankets. Old woman Ashki, her face a web of ancient knowledge, sat by her, chanting a low, melodic song for birth. 2 other Navajo women, Talo's mother and aunt, moved quietly, their hands gentle and sure. Kele was not allowed in the cabin. It was a place for women. He was outside, on the small porch, in the freezing, biting wind. He was more afraid than he had been on the day of the battle. He paced, back and forth, a caged animal. His hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a warrior. He had faced bullets and cavalry charges. But this mystery of life and pain happening just behind that log wall, it was a terror he could not fight. He was useless. He would stop, his head tilted, listening. He heard Lila cry out, a sharp, tearing sound that seemed to pull his own soul from his body. He struck the log wall of the cabin, his fist making a dull thud, the pain a small, sharp anchor in his sea of fear. He walked to the rim of the canyon, the snow swirling around his bare head, and looked up into the gray, unforgiving sky. He prayed. He whispered the Navajo words for protection, for an easy passage, and then, his voice a raw, broken rasp. He prayed in the other language, the one she had taught him, the one from her father's Bible. He did not know the words. Not really, but he spoke from his heart. "Do not take her," he whispered to the storm. "Do not make me cold again, please." Hours passed. The world was a blur of white snow and gray fear. Then the wind died, and in the sudden, echoing silence, a new sound came from the cabin. It was not a cry of pain. It was a thin, high, furious wail. Kele froze, his heart stopping. The cabin door creaked open. Old woman Ashki stood there, frail and exhausted, but her black eyes were bright. She looked at him, and her face, a map of 1,000 wrinkles, broke into a rare, almost toothless smile. "You may enter, Father," she said, her voice dry as rustling corn. "You have a son." He stumbled inside, his legs weak. The cabin was hot, thick with the smell of herbs and life. Lila was lying back, her face pale as the snow, her hair plastered to her temples. But she was smiling, her eyes shining with a light that outshone the fire. She looked at him, and he saw his whole world there. In her arms, wrapped in a soft rabbit skin, was a tiny, red-faced infant. He approached, his steps unsteady. He was a man, afraid of this impossibly small thing. He reached out one finger, his hand scarred and rough, and touched the baby's cheek. The skin was softer than anything he had ever known. "He is healthy, Kele," Lila whispered, her voice tired but strong. "He is perfect." The baby opened his eyes. They were not blue. They were his. They were dark as the deep stone of the canyon, dark as the sky at midnight. But as they caught the light from the fire, they held a spark, a brightness. "He has your eyes," Kel murmured, his voice thick. "Yes," Lila said, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. "But they are bright, like the water that runs through the rock. They are full of hope." Kelly looked at his son, this small, new life, and felt a piece of his soul, the part he thought had frozen and died with his sister. Finally, begin to thaw. "What is his name?" he asked, already knowing. Lila looked from the baby to the open door, where the first light of the clearing storm was breaking. "We named him a long time ago. My love," she said, "his name is Sky, Sky Monroe Yazzie. A name for the great witness, a name from both their worlds." Life settled. The baby was a new center, a new sun for their small universe to orbit. The news from the world outside came in slow, infrequent trickles. Tom Booker, now a regular visitor, brought a letter one day, carried all the way from the territorial capital. It was from Judge Croft. Lila read it aloud, her voice trembling. The judge informed them that Baron Holloway had been convicted, his sentence a full 20 years in a federal prison, and Captain Briggs, shamed and broken, had been court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. The letter went on. The federal government, shamed by the scandal in the light Lila's testimony had shown, was formally reviewing the old, broken treaties. A new commission was being formed. Judge Croft himself was proposing that Red Sky Canyon and the surrounding mesas be designated as a permanent, protected Navajo territory. "It is not a law yet," Lila said, folding the letter, her eyes wet. "It is just paper. Kela, just words." "It is a start," he said, looking at his son. "It is a seed." The school in the cabin grew. Jed, the cowboy, brought his children regularly. The prospector who had spoken at the hearing, his claim now restored, sent his son. On a blanket spread under the rock overhang, the children of the Navajo and the children of the white settlers sat together. Talo, his chest now healed into a proud, jagged scar, sat with them, his English fluent, patiently translating as Lila taught them all how to read the same words, how to live in the same hard land. Tom Booker and Martha Quinn were their family. They came, bringing salt and coffee, bolts of cloth and small, precious tins of candy. Martha, who had no children of her own, claimed Sky as her godson. fussing over him with a gruff tenderness that made Lila smile. One afternoon, Lila looked up and saw a lone rider on the far ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun. Kaylee was on his feet in an instant, his rifle in his hand. The rider was still, just watching. He was too far away to see clearly, but he wore the faded, dirty blue of a uniform. He sat there for a long time, perhaps an hour, a lone, pathetic figure staring at the canyon he had tried to take. He looked at the cabin, at the small, orderly patch of green corn growing by the spring, at the wisp of smoke rising in the peaceful air. He saw a life he could not touch, a life that had been built on his own failure. Then, with a slow, heavy gesture, he turned his horse and rode west, into the fading light. A broken man, a ghost of a war that was finally, truly over. That evening, the air was warm and sweet. Lila sat on the porch, rocking Sky, who was sleeping in the cradleboard Kella had carved. Kaylee came and sat beside her, his back against the cabin wall. They sat in the comfortable quiet they had earned, watching the stars ignite, one by one, in the deep velvet sky. Kaylee looked up, his eyes tracing the great, glittering river of the Milky Way. "Sky is watching," he said, his voice a low, soft rumble. It was the same thing he had said to her that night, in the storm, the night their son was conceived. Lila leaned her head against his strong shoulder, her heart full. She looked at the sleeping face of her child, a perfect, beautiful blend of two worlds. "Yes," she whispered, "he is watching, to see that we did not give up." Kaylee stood and went into the cabin. He returned with his knife. He went to the heavy pine door frame, the one he had built with his own hands. In the pale, silver light of the moon, he began to carve. He did not carve the symbols of his people. He carved the letters she had taught him. He carved, deep into the wood, Lila, and beneath it, Kelly, and then, smaller, newer, Sky. He finished and put his arm around her. She stood, and they looked at their names, a testament, a scar of a different kind, a mark that said we were here. We survived. The camera, in the mind, pulls back. It pulls back from the three figures on the porch, a family. It pulls back from the small, sturdy cabin, a light burning in its window, a thread of smoke rising from its chimney. It pulls back, high, high, over the vast, silent, moonlit canyon, far in the distance, miles and miles south. The lights of a train, the real railroad, can be seen, a noisy, hurried thing of iron and steam. But here, in this high, quiet place, under the eternal, watchful gaze of the sky, a man and a woman had fought for a different kind of life, a harder life, a quieter life, but a life that was, at last, their own. Their love had not changed the world, but it had made a new one, in this small, sacred patch of land. It was a story not of a West that was won, but of a West that was lived, by two hearts who chose each other, and dared to build a home on the line between. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am so curious, where in the world are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments. I would love to connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and like the video. And if you really want to support the channel, please hit that hype button. It helps get these stories heard by more folks.